Fáilte, Cardigan, episode 65 of the Rebel Matters podcast, coming out at last. If you've been waiting for this to come out on Friday, the 10th of April, then I'm sorry it's a little bit late. It's because I spent the last 2 days cleaning up my computer because it was full to capacity and refused to do anything got to do with the podcast or anything else until I sorted out a bit of space, a bit of storage space and memory space on it. So it sent me down the rabbit hole of about 10 hours of moving stuff over onto a hard drive and trying to find out where all the space was being taken up and everything like that. But nevertheless, here we are. And I'm getting this little introduction ready on Good Friday today, actually. And the episode that I've got for you today is one that was recorded back at the end of November as part of the Quiet Lights Festival in Cork, which is run by John Pearson. And it was a panel discussion that was held in Plugged, upstairs from the Roundy in Cork City, and anyone who's familiar with Cork will know exactly where that is. The guests on the show are three people who are all involved in, I suppose, putting on festivals and events. And they are Síobhra Quinlan, who's a creative producer, Aisling Riordan, who is heavily involved in organising the Quarter Block Party, It Takes a Village, and loads more stuff, and Emmet from Homebeat and the festival Another Love Story. I'm putting this episode out. I've got a good few episodes lined up in for the coming weeks, and I've actually been coming to terms with the workload of just making sure to get the episodes out on a consistent basis and kind of setting the foundation for that over the last couple of weeks. And I'd say over the last 2 weeks, I did a lot of interviews. And as I mentioned in loads of the episodes that I've kind of recorded over the last couple of weeks, doing the podcast has definitely been kind of like a lifeline for me because I get to talk to people on Skype and have the chats and catch up with people as well. But then I realised there was quite a lot of work involved in getting all those chats and those interviews to the point where they were ready to be made into episodes. So I've been coming to terms with that over the last week or two, and actually the support from everyone who has come on board as patrons to the show has been a massive boost as well. That's been one of the big things that's been motivating me to keep on going and drive on through the workload. But anyway, what I was going to say there was I chose this chat specifically to put out this week because just a couple of hours ago it got announced that the lockdown situation that we have at the minute is going to be extended for another 3 weeks. And by the time it's finished, we're going to be into the summer. And one of the things that a lot of people look forward to during the summer are all the live gigs and the festivals and the get-togethers. And there's a big question hanging over now whether or not we're going to be able to have those festivals and gigs, and whether they go ahead or not, they're going to be in a fairly different kind of environment as before, for sure, especially this year. But I picked this particular chat to put out as this episode because whatever form the gigs and the festivals take later on this year, it's people like Síobhra and Aisling and Emmet that are going to be organising them. And this chat, it just really gave a brilliant insight into the sort of soul and the heart that goes into organising gigs and organising alternative kinds of festivals. And I suppose the effort that it takes and everything that goes into putting those festivals together and the whole idea behind them. And I think in a world where, like, when you think about it, this whole lockdown and the pandemic has brought into very sharp focus the importance of human interaction and the importance of community and I think local business as well, because you see a lot of small businesses like that are doing unbelievable work now in a time whenever like we really need it, and then contrasted with a lot of the big multinationals that fired their workers straight away, and really at the end of the day, a lot of them don't give a shit other than anything than their bottom line. And I think the same can be said for certain elements of the music industry as well, but it's all about profit and the bottom line and the commodification of the artists and the performers. And talking to Síobhra and Aisling and Emmet, it just brings in the sharp light that there's another way of doing it, a more creative way and a more community orientated way, and a way that's more focused on building friendships and having really unique experiences that are very wholesome and that kind of benefit everyone who's a part of that. And I think that whenever we come out the other side of the pandemic and the whole lockdown thing, that we're going to need that more than ever, which is the reason why I chose to put the chat into this week of the podcast. So just before we get started, I just want to thank John Pearson for organising this festival, because it's a cracker wee festival. It's all gigs are all scattered around in Cork City in different venues, really cool and quirky venues. And there was an unbelievable lineup there, and the vibes were just perfect. And I think even just listening back to this chat myself is making me really look forward to the next time that we can have a get together like that. And I've got a couple of episodes lined up in the coming weeks with different people who are involved in the music and the festival world. So I think it's kind of like the light at the end of the tunnel in a way, when we get that, when this is kind of, when we've moved through this phase of the whole pandemic and we're able to go out and see each other again and touch each other again and socialise and have fun. I think there's going to be a massive release. So I think this little episode is like one of those things where you can get a picture of what goes on behind the scenes in organising those kind of get-togethers and festivals, and look forward to it. Look forward to the next time that we all get to go out and have a party. So yeah, I hope you're all keeping well and safe. And again, I think it's a good opportunity for me to take a wee moment and thank everyone who's out there working on the front line and doing what they can to keep the health service up and running, and keep us in food and all the other crucial sort of services that are being provided. And also thank everyone who's listening here for doing your best to stay inside and help stem the spread of the virus. Fair play to you all for doing that. It's not easy, and I'm sure we're all kind of going through a similar experience, but yet we're all going through a different experience because we all have different circumstances. Some of us are in the house by ourselves, like me, and some of us are out working on the front line. Some of us are with our partners or with our families. Other people are looking after other members of the family, and all those things are very different circumstances. And hope you're all doing okay. Is everybody else having mad dreams? Lads, I am having the most mental dreams ever these days. I dreamt last night that I was at a stand-up comedy gig with Bill Murray, that he was doing stand-up comedy, and I was watching it, and he started taking the piss out of someone who was in the crowd, this fella, and the fella took offence to it, and Bill Murray kept slagging him, and the fella's girlfriend took offence as well, and then the show was over, and they ran off to try and find him to give out to him, and then somehow I ended up getting the picture taken with him, and he put his hands on my shoulders, and I was like, whoa, that's the first time anybody's touched me in a month. It's really weird, and I've been having those weird dreams a lot. The other day I dreamt that my face was melting and I was walking through a hospital and everybody had coronavirus in the hospital, but that was more like a nightmare. Anyway, I think regardless of how different our living circumstances are at the minute. We're probably all going through something very similar in that there's high points where you're feeling all creative and you're getting your side hustles off the ground and you're doing a bit of gardening and keeping the house clean and all that kind of crack. And then other times whenever you feel like shit. And that's definitely happened to me over the last couple of weeks. And if you're experiencing something like that, then I suppose like that's okay. That's just a part of the challenge of what we're going through at the minute. And I've certainly kind of got a bit of a lifeline from being able to talk to people every few days for the podcast. And I'm also very fortunate to be able to call up my brothers and my mum and my dad and my dad's wife Breege and my granny and stuff and have a wee chat with them and call some friends, and some friends have been checking in and I've been checking in with them as well, which is a very, very fortunate position to be in. And it's definitely kind of made me reassess my relationship with my phone and the technology and everything like that there. Like whenever the computer was acting up yesterday, I was like, oh shit. I was like, if this computer breaks now, it's going to be a difficult situation because that's kind of like the line to the outside world. And I've definitely found myself a bit more attached to my phone and my social media kind of accounts. So I've been trying to limit that a little bit and turn my phone off at night time about 10:30 and not turn it back on again until after I've done a bit of stretching and had a cup of coffee and got myself together in the morning. But if you're feeling like crap at some stage, just know that that's going to pass, and also pick up the phone and give somebody a call and let someone know how you're feeling, or just ring somebody for a chat and go for a wee walk as well, get outside. It's a tough situation that we're in, isn't it? But it's going to pass, and there's plenty of good times ahead. We just got to keep on looking out for each other and chucking my trees like hella. Anyway, I suppose we better go on with the episode. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for the support for the podcast. Especially thanks to everyone who's been supporting the podcast over on Patreon. I've done a bit of work on the Patreon where there's now 3 tiers based on 3 of my favourite trees. You can go over there to patreon.com/Rebel Matters and find out what they are and find out what wee perks you can get by signing up to the Patreon. And if you want to become a Patreon, thanks a million. It's a massive help, especially considering the fact that Ackley's closed down these days and I'm kind of doing the podcast full time. But then, as you all know as well, the podcast is free on all the platforms. So if you're not in a position to support it that way, then just share it on social media and send me a wee message and let me know you're listening. That also makes a big difference. Thanks a million to everyone who did send me a message. Unreal. What else? Let me see. I haven't spoke to anybody all day, so I'm kind of buzzing. I'm just thinking, I'm just talking to you now as if like you're sitting here and we're just having the chats. Went for a good wee walk today, actually. I've got the place looking well, in fairness. I don't know if you've found this, but like, you know, anybody who's been, obviously we're all in the house. The longer I'm in the house, I just keep changing wee things, and the house is just evolving into like a wee nest. I got a sheepskin rug today, actually. I've got it on the back of my chair right now. It's very comfortable, from this company called Connacht Wool and Hide. I seen them at Ballymaloe Craft Fair a couple of years ago, and they were selling these sheepskin rugs, and I bought one for my friends who were expecting a baby at the time. Dara and Jess were expecting Lily in a few months, and I brought it home and saved it and gave it to them whenever Lily was born. And then it's class. I always kind of had it in my head, one would be nice for the house, so I ordered it the other day, got it today. So there you go. Anyway, let's get on with this episode here. As well, as usual, at the end of the episode, after the outro music, there's a bit of Roald Dahl. It's the last chapter of Roald Dahl's book, Boy Tales of Childhood. So, if you want to go back to the start of the book, you can go back to episode 51. And if you want to hear the end of the book, then listen through to the end of this chat and you'll hear it after the outro music. I've got another book lined up for you for the next episode. I've already read this one. With the Roald Dahl book, we were kind of reading it together, but this one, I hadn't even expected to put it on the podcast. I just got a lend of it off Roxana McLean, who is lined up for an episode as well. We've already done the chat. She lent it to me, and it was fucking class. It's only a short enough book. So I just went off and recorded a few chapters. So I've got the first chapter coming up next week for you, and I'll tell you what the book is next week. I'll keep it as a wee surprise. Anyway, so enjoy the chats here, and thanks to John and all the crew at Quiet Lights as well. Thanks to Jimmy for hosting the show, the episode. Jimmy runs the record shop, plugged, that the episode was recorded in. And actually, just as an added thing before we get stuck on, I just want to give a massive shout out to Jimmy, because after the lockdown started, it was before all the businesses had to close down like properly. Jimmy was doing home deliveries of vinyls and hand delivered a couple of vinyls up to me, and it was great because I was just after getting back from America and I was feeling all lonely in the house, and got a Karen Dalton record as well as the new Crangbin EP, Texas Sun. Brought them up to the house. What a fucking legend. And then Alex Bruce from Soma dropped some coffee up to the house. Lads, this is what I'm talking about. Local businesses keeping the place going. And it might seem like a small thing, but you don't see fucking Starbucks bringing coffee up to your house, do you? No, you don't. So keep that in mind whenever we get out of this. Go and support all your local businesses. Legends, Grimina Michael lads, Bunsalt, As and Cora. So it's actually kind of unreal to be doing a podcast in Club. So thanks for hosting us, Jimmy. Best record and venue. Who the fuck's here? As you already know, this is part of the Quiet Nights Festival. There's so many things happening around the city, and I think for me, like, this really kind of sums up what a festival should be about. There's events all over the city. Everyone's bringing something special, something different to the table, and I think it's really great pleasure for us to be able to bring kind of a little bit of something different to you guys. So thanks for coming as well. We're going to do about 40 minutes here, and we'll introduce you to the guys in a second, but we just met up for a cup of coffee there beforehand, have a little chat about what we're going to chat about, and I think we all realised that the title of the podcast today is around social and cultural entrepreneurship, and all the guys are involved in their own projects. And I guess like they're heavily involved in separate projects, and the main drivers behind a lot of projects as well. We just realised when we were having a cup of coffee that we all have PTSD from doing things like this, and it was like a therapy session. So feel free to share. Yeah. We nearly didn't actually come here. We were going to let's just stay here and we'll try and sort out our problems and like have a little cry, and we can do a podcast a little different day. But anyway, we made it around anyway. I'm going to give us a little bit of an introduction to the guys, and then they can maybe give us a bit more of an introduction about what they're currently working on, and I'll introduce myself as well at the end, maybe. So Aisling over there is one of the founders of the Quarter Block Party, programmed their music stand. She works for the Good Room, which for anyone who's going to Lankan later on is up in St Luke's, and the Kino and the Cork Podcast Festival, which we did a little podcast for also. And It Takes a Village, the festival. So Emmet runs Homebeat, which is an events promotion agency in Vegas, curator, music label based in Dublin, and also curates the wonderfully magical Another Love Story Festival. And Síobhra, sitting beside me here, is the creative producer in Dublin. Who won't hold that against her. She works for the South End Blues, Other Voices, and And actually, one of the most interesting projects that I think that I'd love you to talk about is the this land theatre piece that was done in conjunction with people who are living in direct provision. And my own name is Andrew Quinlan. In this capacity, have a podcast, Rebel Mothers podcast, which you can check out the rest of the episodes and some other day. But on a everyday, day-to-day kind of capacity, I run a little personal training business, which is just around the corner from here, which kind of is a bit of a kind of concept business in that we have decided to do away with what most people associate with gyms and try something a little bit different, which kind of ties in with the social entrepreneurship side. And we have an egg in the gym and a book club, and we organise some other events. And the main project that we would be involved in at the minute outside of that is opening up a volunteer kind of community-based gym in the West Bank of Palestine in a refugee camp. So we can maybe talk about the ins and outs of that in a little bit, but maybe you guys want to give yourselves a little bit of a more detailed or current introduction there. Ashley, you go first.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose you said all my jobs there, so, but outside of that, I do some work in festivals. This year I was very fortunate, I got to work at Glastonbury, which is amazing, and I do End of the Road. And that's kind of like where I've seemed to be been able to get more work. But yeah, I started off working in the Pavilion, which is where Dali is now, and worked there for three and a half years until it closed down. Then did with my best friend, business partner, Quinlan, we did Southern Hospitality Board, where we put on shows in the city, and then from that then Quarter Black Party came about, and so I'm actually not on the kind of managing committee of Quarter Black Party anymore. I decided to try and give myself a little bit of time. But this year I'm doing a tiny bit of programming for them, but for the most part I'm kind of just letting them do their thing, which is very nice. And then Joe Kelly, who I used to work with in PAV, he started doing Live St. Luke's, and then as they got busier, kind of doing a bajillion projects, I came on board with them, and I am their operations manager now, and I'm festival manager for It Takes a Village. I help with the running of the Kino now, and Live St. Luke's, and whatever other crazy ideas that come up with. I'm like, okay, cool, let's do this, let's make it happen, so yeah.
So now I understand why Ashling has PTSD.
So I suppose the two main projects, as I mentioned, are Homebeat and Another Love Story. Both kind of small, quite stupid ideas that have grown over the years, and I kind of chase after them, and they chase after me in kind of turn, depending on the time of year. And I think so broadly we put on shows in Dublin. The odd time we make it down to Cork for a glorious moment like tonight. We run shows throughout the year in various spaces. Originally the Homebeat thing came from a series of house concerts, and that's kind of grown into shows in various spaces, and as those spaces become rarer and rarer to find in Dublin, increasingly I suppose in more conventional venues, which is a bit disappointing in some ways, but that's what it is. And then Another Love Story is a small but lovely festival which runs an 18th century manor home, kind of crucially inside the manor home, which has handily a ballroom just at the back of the kitchen, which doesn't happen in most houses. And that is entering year 7 now. And again, it was started, I suppose, very much in opposition to the kind of large commercial field festival, which we felt was kind of ubiquitous at the time, about 5 or 6 years ago. So we're still planning that furrow, and it's the thing that we chase after year round. So those two things mainly take up my time when I've got a little 6-month-old daughter who now takes up a whole chunk of other time. So if I'm swinging from that disco ball later on, I'm right off the leash. Yeah, Síobhra.
So I'm Síobhra. I work primarily with Other Voices as a programmer, so in programming and development. I suppose most broadly I'm a creative producer, and it applies to various different projects. I'm kind of now realising Other Voices is actually next week, and what am I doing sitting here? So my role with them is morphed to look after the creative education strands, and then also the conference Ireland's Edge. So we're sort of developing an arts and tech strand as part of that, which is growing. And then in terms of freelance projects, so I work as a creative producer on so sort of like contemporary classical music, and producing my own work as a vocalist and a composer. And then a lot of the voluntary work that I've been doing over the past few years has now kind of fed into creative projects. So yeah, working with people in direct provision. And that has kind of grown into a collaboration with Ramsey, who are an amazing grassroots movement, so the refugee asylum seeker Solidarity of Ireland group. And we started running these solidarity sessions, and it's really just like a coming together of musicians that are living in DP and musicians that are local to the area, and they collaborate, and we have a great time.
Great, thank you guys. So we've been given the sort of starting point for the discussion of social and cultural entrepreneurship. So I think maybe a good starting point here would be to maybe try and define it, because I think even just from talking to you beforehand that we probably all have somewhat of a different kind of perspective on what social and cultural entrepreneurship is. So I'm going to throw it open to the three of you, whoever wants to jump in there. What do you think that entails?
I would broadly guess that kind of the link between the three of us, I suppose, is that all the projects we work in have a focus on something that's not the kind of crass commercialism, or just money first kind of approach, and generally the community, like certainly with Aisling and obviously with Síobhra and her work, and where Homebeat and Another Love Story would have come from is an emphasis on genuinely focusing on a community that's maybe either underrepresented or that is being kind of washed over. Certainly with Homebeat, the idea at the start was the house concert was just a really nice, intimate way of putting on shows. At the time, I'd just come back from travelling and didn't really have a connection to the music scene. I had I loved music, but I had no in. I didn't know anyone who worked in Quinlan. I didn't know. At the time, Dublin seemed a very closed kind of clique, as most cities do, to say, just when you come back or you come in. So Homebeat, the thing that came out of that was a very intimate, a very small community. People kind of gathered around that very quickly, and the thing that has sustained it as a project has been that initial burst of intimacy and energy, which means there's a personality, I hope, to what I do. And similarly with Another Love Story, it was set up to be something that wasn't that huge, unpersonalised festival experience where you've been fed through a machine from the minute you get to the car park, and you're kind of fed through the line at the start to get in. There's no personal experience or encounter in it. So I would think that the broad link between what we all do is an emphasis on those things. I know certainly the lads in Quarter Block, obviously what drives that is community around the space that it was set up in. And very
delusion as well.
Yeah, a lot of delusion. There's I think it's obvious from our chat earlier, there's a whole strand of this which could be kind of failures and the nerves around these things. But I suppose and what does come out in a lot of these kind of conversations is discussions around resources and lack of money and stuff. And that can be kind of limiting in discussion. What's really positive about all the things that we talk about here is the heart and the passion that goes into these projects. And that's the thing that I would see as kind of cultural entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship sounds like something that there should be money involved in. And very often with these things, money is not the focus. But it's that heart and passion that I think is the core part of what separates entrepreneurship in a business sense and probably cultural entrepreneurship. And I want to share culture and to explore culture. And I think that would be something.
One of the kind of thoughts I've had about that kind of cultural and social entrepreneurship is that, in a way, in comparison to, say, the that kind of crass consumerism, where money is the main thing, it's kind of like a straight line where there's the producer, there's the consumer, and then someone along the line is going to kind of suffer at the hands of it, whether it's the environment. If you look at some of the kind of the environmental impact of some of the big festivals, whereas the smaller things, the things that are, let's say, driven by small groups of people within communities, are more of a closed loop in that everyone benefits from it. The person who puts the people who put the festival on benefit from it because they're a close-knit team. The people who get the festival benefit from it because it strengthens the community and it strengthens the bonds within a city or a town. And for me, I think that's a really important aspect of all of the projects that you guys have mentioned that you are already involved in. But why do you think there's such a space for those types of things today? How come we have festivals like this and all the stuff you guys are involved in?
And I think even just it feels like a million years ago, but when the Southern Hospitality Board, which was myself and Quinlan's promotion company for years, that was born out of us. We literally came up with the idea the night that the venue that we worked in closed down, and it was we need to do something because we know that like once this place is gone, there's going to be a huge hole in the city. And it was for a while. It was very like everyone was like, what are we going to do? We've nowhere to go anymore. And I think for us, and actually another big reason was that I had 3 shows booked. It was actually Russell Gannon family, a guy called Eamon Dunes from the States, and Girl Band. And I was like, I need to find somewhere to put these shows. And actually Jimmy, shout out to Jimmy, wherever he is the person that like really helped us in that time to make those shows happen. But like I think that's where all this stuff comes from, is like of me just like we need to do something to have things to look forward to. I think that especially like it's always been the reason why I love going to shows and why I love going to festivals, and I know working what I do is that like I think it's really important for everyone's mental health to have things to look forward to, you know, because like, you know, you have really shit weeks and then you're like, okay, it's fine, this weekend I'm going to see all my friends at Quiet Lights or whatever, like, you know, I'm going to have that time, so it kind of gets you through. So then being able to facilitate those events I think is really lovely. It might not be the same experience for you as the person putting on the thing, but like, you know, you do get different things out of it then.
It's such an important point, something I really come to realise over the last couple of years with some of the projects that you've specifically been involved in. For example, It Takes a Village. Like you just sit there at 3 o'clock in the morning and you look around the courtyard and there's all a big selection of loads of the most up and coming Irish artists. They're all sitting there talking to each other. And I actually thought to myself, is this why these guys are after putting this festival on, to try and bring all these people together? And it's just strength. It makes such a strong bond between artists and even all the crew that were there, and even the people who are around it. Then you go off to say another little festival like this and you see the same people. It does, like, for sure, does something positive to the psyche of a community when you have that bond between people. And I think, would it be fair to say that like there are certain issues like the direct provision that probably bring a certain...
Yeah, I think like judging off what Ashton's saying, it's nearly as if it comes up as an antidote. It's normally like it comes as a reaction to something, a rejection of something that you don't want to partake in. And definitely with other voices and with this kind of vibe of the festival, it's a very different experience from, let's say, an MCD type festival. And I guess the currency... but the currency and the outcome, I mean, it's kind of intangible, because when you're not working with big profit margins, and that's not necessarily the aim of the game, but the aim of the game is to create this intangible, intimate experience, and it's a difficult thing to kind of coin, but when you create it, you feel it. But with the solidarity sessions, I mean, that definitely arose as, I suppose, kind of an antidote and a reaction to a lot of the hate that is in existence in our country, and I suppose trying to ameliorate just fear around the unknown, and trying to introduce new people and new migrants into our communities and collaborate in a way. And to collaborate in a way where it doesn't feel like it's not like a charity gig, it's not there's nothing patronising about it, it's purely a coming together of artists that are from different places.
It's nearly like a sort of like what I was going to say, like it's kind of like the cross-section of artistic curation and activism in a way, when you end up getting that sense of duty to do something. I was telling you, it's like, so in the gym around the corner, we have this thing where instead of doing meetings in place, we just do a little lap. And every time we do these laps where we're walking around, we start coming up with these new ideas. And it was like the other day, I was like, look, let's do the meeting and we'll go for a lap. But like, no more ideas. Like, we can't keep coming up with these ideas and running more events, because like there's only 4 of us or 5 of us, whatever. And so we went for a lap the other day and we were walking around, and by the time we got back, we were like, fuck, we have to do an anti-Black Friday event. So I thought Black Friday was actually this Friday, so we put it on. Turns out it's next Friday. Shows what I know.
You're just too on it.
But so I guess that's another question. I guess is do you guys feel like a kind of a sense of purpose or some sort of drive and motivation to put these things on because of the fact that it's, in essence, it's going against the status quo, it's breaking out of the mold, or kind of going against the mainstream or something like that?
It's actually interesting because it's something I think I've forgotten a bit in the last like maybe year or two. Just like it's kind of, it does get, that idea gets worn out of you at the start. You're like, yeah, I'm gonna do this thing. I'm gonna work crazy amount of hours to make these things happen, and I'm not gonna pay myself, and I'm gonna try. You figure out ways of doing it, but like it's really nice to talk about this because I kind of had forgotten a little bit of those are exactly the reasons why we're doing all of this stuff. And like, you know, especially if you're running festivals with like Other Voices and Other Love Story and Cork Background Takes Village, it's like, it's not about you at all. Like it's literally you're trying to like create this environment for people to enjoy themselves, and like as you said, like for artists to come together. And I think especially with Other Voices and Another Love Story, those are very big aims of that. It's like a collaborative thing with artists, but also the audience is very much involved as well and has like so much exposure to that. But it kind of is. I don't know, I can't remember what the question was exactly, but a lot of the drive comes from like seeing the energy that people are getting from the thing that you're putting on for them.
Is it another element of this social and cultural entrepreneurship, to use that term, is I think like it's to do away with the anonymity that comes with the massive franchise where artists can disappear, workers can disappear, the crew behind it can disappear, and then eventually then the audience disappears as well in a way, and it just becomes about the money. I think. And maybe you'd be well placed to talk a little bit about that based on the work you're doing.
Yeah, I think, and that's like to follow on from what Aisling said, like I think all those events, like the magic of Other Voices is that you're all together in Dingle. I think the thing that people first noticed when Other Voices kind of moved from kind of the initial little kind of small TV thing in the church, and when people really started to engage with it, is that like, oh my God, like I chatted to Gruff Reese or whoever it was that I met on the street, like we got tickets to go to the church of, I can't remember, one of the bands who played on Friday night. We met them in the pub that night and they were leaving in the morning. They were like, oh, do you want our tickets to go to gig in the church? Like that doesn't happen at Electric Picnic or, you know, those big festivals. Like you said, It Takes a Village, that meeting of people. But that only comes from a very determined sense from the people who run the festivals down, that it's, a community is an overused word in these things, and it's kind of abused a little bit. But like, it's a flat hierarchy that like we're all in this together, that artists should be sitting next to the audience. There's no reason in the world why they shouldn't, you know, they're just humans. And part of the things that stop people doing or making events like this from the outside is that they feel like maybe bands or the people who run festivals are like, you know, superheroes, but they're just human beings. And it's taken me as a booker and a promoter like years to kind of get over the fright of actually chatting to someone who makes that amazing music that I listen to in my bedroom. Like, it took me a long time to like not freak out at that. And now
I still do.
Yeah.
I've made an absolute tit of myself. It's actually really humanising as well when that happens to you after all the time.
Yeah, and they're normal people and they have their own lives going on, and generally nice music lends itself to nice people in a very broad sense. But I think all those events and all these things that we're talking about kind of genuinely bring all sorts of walks of people together and want them to interact, as opposed to trying to separate them out and keep them away from each other to create some sense of, I don't know if it's to create a sense of mystique or it's to create a hierarchy that means money can maybe disappear somewhere and people don't know where it goes to, or something like that. But
it's really interesting as well because a lot of the bigger festivals are now trying to like create that intimacy as well. It found because it used to like the Oxygen and the kind of Electric Picnic of those kind of big super festivals seems to have like, that's not the kind of festival people want to go to. Like they've gone to Another Love Story and they want that intimacy and they want to be able to see, as you said, like people just like bump into graffiti walking around. They want that now. So I think that like a lot of like the newer festivals happening are trying to imitate that vibe as well, which is really interesting to see that change.
Like there must be kind of some sort of primal programming in us when it comes to a festival, that everyone's coming on the same level and some people are entertaining and some people are watching and everyone's kind of like at ground level together in a way. But Emmet, you mentioned something there about sort of breaking down that divide between people, which in essence, when you hear people talking about direct provision, that's the whole problem with it, is that there's a group of people who are in sort of some form of captivity in Ireland that have no connection with the community that they're in or the community that they've come into. So has that been one of the kind of main factors with the work you're doing?
Yeah, I think it has, and it's interesting to observe I suppose the ethos has to feed from within, and observing how other voices treats its artists. You know, you're welcomed into this community that looks after you while you're there. And again, yeah, community is becoming this really kind of like charged word in a way that like empowerment has kind of lost its meaning. But I think that it's interesting to observe the sort of domino effect of that, where if the crew feel that they're really nurturing the sense of community, and then the artists feel extremely comfortable, and then the way that they give on stage is even more vulnerable. And it's just this beautiful sort of cyclical energy that kind of occurs, and it passes sort of back and forth. And then, yeah, when I began volunteering in direct provision centres and in refugee centres in Germany, I suppose that was maybe something that kind of came with me. And that feeling that, you know, it's not this divide of somebody's over here and somebody's over there, and that you can really facilitate that kind of collaboration, and it's actually very simple when you break it down into its most sort of human form.
Yeah, if the bigger festivals are, I'll say, if certain, like if an organisation or a festival or something that kind of decides to try and appropriate that community sort of title or whatever, I think that's the thing that you can take the term, but you can't take the ideas and the philosophy behind it, and you can't take the sort of the product really. Like you can try and take the title, but
if it's not coming from within, and if it's just plastered on the top of it.
Yeah. So to maybe like expand on that a little bit, like what do you guys feel like the term community actually is as essence, based on the work you're doing?
I suppose for me, with the work that I'm doing with Ramsey and with these solidarity sessions, I guess reframing what community means. And I think often we feel that our community is the one that we came from and the one that we should exist in. And just sort of, I guess, reframing the concept of that communities can be created in ways that we haven't sort of yet experienced, and the idea of that is more diverse, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a verbal exchange. A lot of it is so non-verbal, and that's what I think kind of the beauty of a music festival, this sort of coming together of people. And again, solidarity is one of those words which is being bandied around, but to watch a gig and to watch, actually there's Cormac Beatty. Cormac recently, or well not recently enough, but 2 years ago, collaborated with a wonderful Syrian musician, an oud player, and himself and Libby McGrahan collaborated with Safe Khan, and they've sort of continued to stay in touch. And to see something like that, to see trad musicians from different countries and different traditions come together and pretty much non-verbally collaborate is just extremely powerful. And then you're constructing a whole new kind of community.
Emmet, you mentioned something earlier on that I think it can seem like somewhat of a paradox to put the term entrepreneur or entrepreneurship in the same sort of sentence as community. Because like when I think about community, in a way I kind of think that to say that you're a member of a community is not dependent on like your ability to pay to be a part of it in a way, but then the entrepreneurship side, obviously there is an element of like there has to be an element of finance involved in it. If say any of these festivals are going to take part, then everyone still has to pay the rent and stuff like that there. So I guess it's kind of a bit of a trade-off there in a way. I don't know, or is it a trade-off?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose all these things, like we're not talking about supermassive businesses on any scale the same as your gym, and I think your work in how you create your practice as a business is very similar to all these conversations. That doesn't lend itself to a lot of hard-nosed big business decisions because you're concerned about other things as opposed to just money and just going in that straight line. We've talked already about the circular idea of people giving and getting out of a business as opposed to just kind of paying money, being taken advantage of, and then thrown out the door. So it's a balance, and all these kind of community-led projects, whether it's like not-for-profits, I think the one element that runs a thread through all of them is a lack of resources, and it's something that's difficult in all these, especially small festivals. I know a really good comparison is having talked to Joe about It Takes a Village. I think you guys load in on Thursday or maybe Friday morning
because the site is Trebogan Holiday Village, where there's literally like I go down on the Thursday morning and there's like kids running around everywhere, and there's like, you know, an Ed Sheeran cover act in the main hall that like your father's played there like, the first year, like it's really it's bizarre.
I think what's more disturbing than the start of the festival is the end of the festival.
If
you happen to stay after the festival is over a little bit, like we were sitting in the kind of canteen there, just kind of hugging on to these cups of tea, and then the next thing we just looked up, there was kids everywhere. They were like with balloons, and there were like clowns and stuff. And we were like, wow, what's happening?
Yeah, the giant
Folly Village is after taking off again.
Well, on the opposite side of that, we have a build now of about 10 days. So we'd have kind of, we'd arrive with a core staff of about 5 or 6, and then we'd have up to, throughout the festival, we'd have a staff of 150. So we have to feed and keep those people for 10 days, whereas I say it takes Village has the advantage of just being able to do it because the infrastructure is different.
Yeah.
So I suppose my point being is that you know, these things really don't happen on a whim and a prayer. It takes even small things take quite a bit of effort, and most of them being under-resourced rely on a huge amount of goodwill and effort from their core crew. Like all our crew are real good friends, and it's a real family affair and a love story. The people who own the manor and who, like on the Monday we go in and we take out their TV and their rugs and their couches, and then they let 1,000 give or take people through their house into the ballroom for a weekend. We haven't had a book stolen, we haven't had like a picture taken off the wall in 7 years, so all that thing feeds back into what we were talking about earlier about community, and for us I think it's that trust. Not love story, the key tenet of the whole thing is the personal family. Roland and Zoe and Diana, their mother, Ollie the dog, and the 2 kids allow us stewardship of the house. And every year we talk to our staff about the fact that exactly what Síobhra was saying, that the crew are the people that hold the space for the festival. They create that sense of community. And the trust that the people feel when they arrive to the festival, that they're allowed into someone's actual home. So it's literally their actual home, like they're allowed in there for the entire weekend. That creates an atmosphere, and it creates a sense of, it creates a precedent for how people behave. And we don't really have a lot of, so far we haven't had like a lot of hassles. We have a couple of famous, like Acid Girl was a famous drug case, a few other extraordinarily entertaining escapades every year. But in general, I think that trust has created that sense of community, and that's the thing that holds it. It's important.
It's so true, and that it's on a much smaller scale in our training facility around the corner from here. We have a little library in the back, and the policy is anybody can come in and take any of the books and just bring them back at some stage. But I don't think we've lost any books, because people bring them back all the time. They just know that they're, I don't know, is it maybe like that people are given a sense of value in themselves, and then they respect that? And
when you talk currently about the ideas of licensing laws and all the things that we're trying to fight for at the moment, especially in anyone who works in any sort of nighttime entertainment, and so much of the conversation is about, oh, you couldn't do that, you couldn't let people out till 7 o'clock in the morning, they'd go wild. It Takes a Village, Another Love Story, and Other Voices all happen in real places. You know, they happen in a business which is Trebalgan, they happen in someone's home which is Quinlan Manor, they happen in a town that exists Dingle. If you trust people to go there and act appropriately, and you don't tell them, no, you can't go there, no, you can't do that, no, you can't, you keep telling people you can't do things they want to do it. It's very basic psychological workings. So if you trust people, and if you trust people to stay out till 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning, who cares? It's going to be fine. If you trust people, they will actually repay you, and that's what happens with the books.
We had a fundraiser in July, which Aisling was kind enough to volunteer as well. Everybody volunteered at it. It was the Jim Jam, and we were raising money for this project that we have in Palestine. And the landlord agreed to it, but I don't even think we knew how big it was going to get or how busy it was going to get. But we sold about 350 tickets or something like that, and it went on until like 8 o'clock the next morning. And there was nothing happened. There was nothing bad. Well, my cousin tried to climb over the gate and fell off, and the gate was open, but apart from she was okay. But apart from that, and one guy jumped over the wall. But apart from that, it was all good. And it was just that idea, it's just everyone's kind of respecting the space and whatnot. Yeah. You mentioned the thing there, which I think is probably a good place to go with this conversation now, about the lack of resources. Something that we talked about earlier on in Soma was, the number one resource that we're talking about here is time and effort and the human resources, and I think you guys are very well placed to maybe talk a little bit about how you manage that. And like the list of things that you guys are involved in is quite extensive, and I'd be really interested to see how you manage it, how you decide which things to go with and which things maybe to put on the long finger or just like X completely, and how that affects you kind of your own personal health in a way, I guess.
I think this year is the first year I've taken my own health seriously in the work that I do, and it was like it had to happen because I wasn't functioning properly. I wasn't performing to I wasn't being the person I wanted to be in work, and like it was really hard. Like I was, especially just around quarter block party, because that was really something that like it wasn't something that we're like, let's do. We kind of were like, right, we have to do this festival. We're going to do it, and it happened. And then it just kept kind of rolling on. And like I was saying to you a while ago, that I kind of should have maybe taken a break a few years ago. But I was like, this year I was like, okay, cool, I'm gonna do it. Because normally around this time of the year, I'd just be trying my hair out, trying to get everything done for the festival in February, and it's just really weird to me to not have that element. But also it's really nice to like go home in the evening after working in the kino and doing St. Luke stuff and just be like, okay, cool, I'm gonna watch Netflix and I'm just gonna cook my own dinner for myself. So I think that like really you really get pushed in this work to your limits at all times. Like during the festival, it's like you are just like operating in fight or flight. You're like responding to everything that's happening. So when you finish that, you are completely drained. Like I'm sure you're the same, but like I just get so sick after every festival I do. It's like a week or two of like antibiotics or whatever to get myself back to being a functioning human. But yeah, it's taken a really long time for me to like take it seriously. But now that I am, it's the most important thing for me, because I don't know, I want to be able to function as a person outside of the work I do, and have a bit of a life as well, maybe, I don't know. So yeah, it's a lot of it is just like, yeah, as you're saying, just like being able to go, actually no, I can't do that, and I'll do this thing, but maybe I won't do it right now, I might do it in a few months' time. And yeah, understanding your own limits and respecting them and listening to your body when it's like crying out for you to stop.
Absolutely, and I think also considering how much energy it takes to create that really safe vibe and create that ethos, and to be able to give that then to the artists and to the community that you've gathered. And that takes a lot of rest to be able to reserve that energy so that you can give it. And I think it's something that maybe is learned along the way but not really spoken about, but just the necessary recovery time post-event. And I think there's kind of like an egotistical macho type mentality that underpins a lot of the arts of like, you know, I'm doing this and then I went to this and then I'm on tour and it's kind of like the more you do, the more you've achieved. But if you are running on low and you're not able to give and create that sort of intangible, intimate connection that you're trying to create, then it hasn't worked. And learning when to say like, yes, I could take on this big massive project, and learning when it's just not gonna fly.
It seems like the key word there is to create. Like if you're creating something that doesn't currently exist, then that is, you have to put a lot of energy into that thing to make it exist.
Yeah.
Eventually, because it's not there at the minute, and you want to make it there.
So where does that come from?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Crucially, like I think the thing that I've learned over time is that, and you can get very easily swept up when you do these kind of things, because there's a lot of great festivals, there's a lot of great events, and you can get very easily distracted on what other people are doing. And you can look over your shoulder and you can worry about them doing it better or other people doing it differently. I think the thing that's come to me in the last few years is that like the only thing that's unique about whatever it is you do is whatever's coming out of your own mind. So like your energy is the thing that's actually the most crucial thing in your work. If you're really personally, like I think there's a difference here between going and working in a petrol station, there's nothing wrong with it, but like you're going in, you're clocking in, you're doing your hours, you're going home, you maybe don't have a personal connection with the work, like in the sense that your personality is not intertwined. A lot of people who work in these kind of industries are very, very personally intertwined in their work, and their creation, the creative form of creating an event means that like you take the highs and the lows of it very seriously, because you're so swept up in the whole thing, and it's so intrinsically part of how you view yourself and how the arc of your year goes in a work sense. Like I really love having a love story now, because it's I have one big project that I can kind of break the wave of the rest of the year off around. So it's nice. But if you don't manage your own energy and you don't protect your own energy, there's nothing special left, like what have you got to give at that stage? All you've got to give, if you're working as a creative professional, all you've got to give is your own creative ideas, really. And if you don't have the energy to come up with that, or you don't sustain yourself, like Aisling was talking about, if you don't create some sort of practice that allows you to do that in the fullness of how you want to do it, then you end up with nothing, basically.
I was down a couple of days ago, as I was saying to you earlier on, with Dame McLean and Siobhra here, and we got into this real deep conversation about creativity and how to, like, in essence, we all have that ability to be creative no matter what we're doing, and we have this blank canvas, and that's what you guys are doing. I guess that's you could take that perspective, and anyone could take that with what they're doing with their lives, and like creating a piece of art in a way.
We're basically really crap musicians. Well, I'm really bad musicians, so I had to get on with this side of the shelf. I really believe that. Like, there's like the art of, like, for me anyway, certainly, like I love the programming, the arc of a full festival, Friday to Sunday. It's really fun to get to fill in those dots and create a wave of energy and to see people engage with that in the way you want it to do. I think that's a creative act. It might not be drawing or painting, or it might not be writing a song, but I think in its own way it's got a creative element to it.
I think that's a positive framing of the term creativity, to step away from being stuck to the idea that it has to be a painting or it has to be a song, because it
can also be like a really well done spreadsheet. Like,
creativity.
Like Google Drive folders, and then
You don't have any skills given. If anyone wants some spreadsheet to $5 tip.
We want to give people the opportunity to ask us a few questions. So if you have any questions, we'll start thinking about that and come back to us in a second. I think that maybe a good direction to go to next is what do you think the future is for this type of project and this type of cultural or social entrepreneurship?
We're going to get sponsored by Topaz next year. I don't know. It seems to be growing. I mean, I guess both the encouraging and discouraging bit, as we said, is when you see the bigger corporations kind of start to take on the language or the kind of feel of the smaller things and commodify it. I guess that's age old and it's going to keep happening. I think as long I'll speak for Dublin because I suppose I've lived there. I'll just say for the record that I'm from Limerick, just in case. I'm really.
Which works down to everyone.
Yeah. But seeing Dublin over the last kind of 10 years, like definitely there's been a wave of new energy. Like places like BIM, the music college, have changed the landscape of how music is produced and how kids are forming bands and are much more professional. And there's a whole new wave of bands and artists and DJs and producers that was maybe even 2 years ago were just bubbling under. So with a little bit of experience and only a very little bit, like it's interesting to see how things regenerate in the city. And that's going to keep going. Like one thing I've learned for sure is that like there's going to be another It Takes a Village. There's going to be another love story. There's going to be other voices. And people's drive to do these things isn't quenched because someone always has a special idea and feels like there's something special that they can do, or they have a bunch of friends or a type of music that they really love and they want to share that with people. And that's going to keep happening, I think, and it's not going to stop, even despite the forces of no spaces, higher rents, all those things just drive it on actually in a different direction.
That's kind of the point that you were making earlier on, Síobhra, about like the more that there's something to fight against, the more that these things are going to start to keep coming up in a way.
Yeah, and I think in terms of sustainability of these models, I suppose the goodwill that drives it and how these different communities interact, and it's so lovely to see, different festivals supporting each other and these different communities supporting each other. So I think that they exist but don't exist in silos is vital to them surviving as well.
So I'm going to open it up a little bit. If anyone has any questions you'd like to ask any of us up here, then this is your chance.
Spreadsheets.
And talk with spreadsheets all day.
Like my own kind of when I think about with my like rose tinted crystal ball or whatever, the kind of when I think about the future of these types of things, and if we're going to call it this kind of social or cultural entrepreneurship, then I like to think that the future of entrepreneurship in general is based around these things, because of the fact that when you look around some of the major issues that we're facing in today's society. You guys have mentioned some of them already, like the fact that resources are like slim on the ground, rent is increased, and we have like things like the environment, the planet Earth to look after as well, which I think is something that is probably being considered more and more. And these types of projects, I kind of like to think that that more people become involved in projects that they have that full cycle of mutual benefit for everyone who's involved in the cycle, and there's not always someone kind of like left at the bottom of the pile. As such, do you think that that's becoming more popular?
It was interesting at End of the Road this year, which is Professor Riordan in Dorset in the UK. There was this guy who was like an environmental, I call him an investigator. He went around to the whole site and did like a big evaluation about how, so it is quite an eco-friendly site as is, but he was like trying to figure out how it could work even better. And I think that that's like I do think that the word sustainability is another one of those words that's kind of been taken and kind of capitalized on. But I think that like it's not a bad thing. It's a really great thing. I think that that's where all of these things need to go, is like sustainability within themselves and kind of leaving less of a footprint afterwards. That they can happen, but that there's not like loads of tents left behind afterwards as well.
I think, allowing culture to fill those spaces, because it sort of forces us to engage emotionally with things that we might otherwise push away. And there's a project that we're working on for next week for Other Voices as part of the Creative Education Strand, where we collaborate with Clean Coast, which is like an Antashka initiative. And we're bringing together a group of kids that are kind of under the age of 10, and they'll work with an environmentalist who will kind of talk about the earth and the sea and how we're destroying the planet, and the kids will kind of absorb that, and then they'll be facilitated by God Knows and Denise Chela, and they will help the kids kind of verbalise not just what they think but what they feel about all of that, and hopefully there'll be some kind of song or a rap or piece of something. But I think like the role of culture in getting us to emotionally engage with those issues is kind of key, because that's what then drives the energy towards maybe actually changing something.
Like on a very basic reading, like festivals are gatherings of people, like they're large scale gatherings. Like, is there anything that has been more pervasive in like introducing ideas about sustainability or other practices? Like I would say on the opposite side, we spend every summer in Riordan in Kerry, and in the last few years there's been, each August weekend there's been like a load of kids down there leaving tents behind. We just would have never done that when we were kids. Like we would never have thought to do it. And I would say the big festivals are actually very, 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 very to blame for that. They've created a culture to this point where suddenly they're interested in sustainability because it's going to sell them tickets. But to this point, they've encouraged people to leave tents behind because they haven't actually told them not to. They didn't even put a sign up. I never saw a sign in years ago in the electric picnic. I never once saw a sign in the campsites that said, "Please don't leave your tent behind." Never once. So like when I see tents being left in Riordan in the dunes every August, I go, well, what are the big collections of people? Where are these kids learning to do this? It's easy. They're learning it at festivals where they're not going to. So we have a huge responsibility and an opportunity when we gather people to create an atmosphere or to teach people things. It might be have 3 pints instead of 2 pints. It might be don't bring your tents home. It might be go completely nuts. Whatever your thing is you want to give to people, but you have that opportunity when you gather people together.
Like you mentioned something there which I think may be a good kind of point to maybe finish up our conversation about festivals being a gathering of people, and in that like it's an age-old like practice that we've always had and we always are going to have, and it's a time when people come together and share ideas and share food and meet each other and fall in love and spend great times together. And I think that I don't think that we'll ever be able to measure the value of that and the importance of it and the importance of keeping it going, festivals, and also like the music and the fun that happens at festivals. So on that note, I would like from the bottom of my heart to thank the three of you guys, not only for coming and taking part in this beautiful little chat with all these people here as part of the Quiet Lights, but also for all the work that you guys are doing for curating and giving those opportunities for people to come together, because I think that it is absolutely priceless. So, Graham and Wyliff. Thanks Sorry guys for coming. Hope you enjoyed the rest of the night, and also thanks to Quiet Lights and
Well done, Cork. Round of applause, Cork.
This is the last instalment of Roald Dahl's book, Boy Tales of Childhood. As I mentioned before, this is my first time reading this book as well, so we've kind of been reading it together, which has been fun, and people have been sending me wee messages here and there to say that they're enjoying the little story time at the end of the podcast episodes, so I might try and find something else to read for the next episode of the podcast. Anyway, this chapter is called Games and Photography. I think there's one more chapter left after this as well, which we'll get through the two of them today. Games and photography. It was always a surprise to me that I was good at games. It was an even greater surprise that I was exceptionally good at two of them. One of these was called fives, the other was called squash rackets. Fives, which many of you will know nothing about, was taken seriously at Repton. And we had a dozen massive glass-roofed fives courts, kept always in perfect condition. We played the game of Eaton fives, which is always played by 4 people, 2 on each side, and basically it consists of hitting a small, hard, white, leather-covered ball with your gloved hands. The Americans have something like it which they called handball, but Eaton fives is far more complicated because the court has all manner of ledges and buttresses built into it, which help make it a subtle and crafty game. Fives is possibly the fastest ball game on earth, far faster than squash, and the little ball ricochets around the court at such a speed that sometimes you can hardly see it. You need a swift eye, strong wrists, and a very quick pair of hands to play fives well, and it was a game I took to right from the beginning. You may find it hard to believe, but I became so good at it that I won both the junior and the senior school fives in the same year when I was 15. Soon I bore the splendid title Captain of Fives, and I would travel with my team to other schools like Shrewsbury and Uppingham to play matches. I loved it. It was a game without physical contact, and the quickness of the eye and the dancing of the feet were all that mattered. A captain of any game at Repton was an important person. He was the only one who selected the members of the team for matches. He and only he could award colours to others. He would award school colours by walking up to the chosen boy after a match and shaking him by the hand and saying, "Gregor's on you, teamer." These were the magic words. They entitled the new teamer to all manner of privileges, including a different coloured hat band on his straw hat and a fancy braid around the edges of his blazer, and different coloured games clothes, and all sorts of other advertisements that made the teamer gloriously conspicuous among his fellows. A captain of any game, whether it was football, cricket, fives or squash, had many other duties. It was he who pinned the notice on the school notice board on match days announcing the team. It was he who arranged fixtures by letter with other schools. It was he and only he who had it in his power to invite this master or that to play against him and his team on certain afternoons. All these responsibilities were given to me when I became captain of fives. Then came the snag. It was more or less taken for granted that a captain would be made a bozer in recognition of his talents. If not a school bozer, then certainly a house bozer. But the authorities did not like me. I was not to be trusted. I did not like rules. I was unpredictable. I was therefore not bozer material. There was no way they would agree to make me a house bozer, let alone a school bozer. Some people are born to wield power and to exercise authority,
I was not one of them. I was in full agreement with my housemaster when he explained this to me. I would have made a rotten bozer. I would have let down the whole principle of bozerdom by refusing to beat the fags. I was probably the only captain of any game who's never become a bozer at Repton. I was certainly the only unbozed double captain, because I was also captain of the squash rackets, and to pile glory upon glory, I was in the school football team as well. A boy who is good at games is usually treated with great civility by the masters at an English public school. In much the same way, the ancient Greeks revered their athletes and made statues of them in marble. Athletes were the demigods, the chosen few. They could perform glamorous feats beyond the reach of ordinary mortals. Even today, fine footballers and baseball players and runners and all other great sportsmen are much admired by the general public, and advertisers use them to sell breakfast cereals. This never happened to me, and if you really want to know, I'm awfully glad it didn't. But because I loved playing games, life for me at Repton was not totally without pleasure. Game playing at school is always fun if you happen to be good at it, and it is a hell if you're not. I was one of the lucky ones, and all those afternoons on the playing fields and in the fives courts and the squash courts made the otherwise grey and melancholy days pass a lot more quickly. There was one other thing that gave me great pleasure at this school, and that was photography. I was the only boy who practiced it seriously, and it was not quite so simple a business 50 years ago as it is today. I made myself a little darkroom in the corner of the music building, and in there I loaded my glass plates and developed my negatives and enlarged them. Our artsmaster was a shy, retiring man called Arthur Norris, who kept himself well apart from the rest of the staff. Arthur Norris and I became close friends, and during my last year he organised an exhibition of my photographs. He gave the whole of the art school over to this project and helped me to get my enlargements framed. The exhibition was rather a success, and masters who had hardly ever spoken to me over the past 4 years would come up and say things like, "It's quite extraordinary. We didn't know we had an artist in our midst. Are they for sale?" Arthur Norris would give me tea and cakes in his flat and would talk to me about painters like Cézanne and Manet and Matisse, and I have a feeling that it was there, having tea with this gentle, soft-spoken Mr. Norris in his flat on Sunday afternoons, that my great love of painters and their work began. After leaving school, I continued for a long time with photography, and I became quite good at it. Today, given a 35mm camera and a built-in exposure meter, anyone could be an expert photographer. But it was not so easy 50 years ago. I used glass plates instead of film, and each of those had to be loaded into a separate container in the darkroom before I set out to take pictures. I usually carried with me 6 loaded plates, which allowed me only 6 exposures, so that clicking the shutter even once was a serious business that had to be carefully thought out beforehand. You may not believe it, but when I was 18, I used to win prizes and medals from the Royal Photographic Society in London, and from other places like the Photographic Society of Holland. I even got a lovely big bronze medal from the Egyptian Photographic Society in Cairo, and I still have the photograph that won it. It was a picture of one of the so-called 7 wonders of the world, the Arch of Ctesiphon in Iraq. This is the largest unsupported arch on earth, and I took the photograph while I was training out there for the RAF in 1940. I was flying over the desert solo in an old Hawker Hart biplane, and I had my camera around my neck. When I spotted the huge arch standing alone in the sea of sand, I dropped one wing and hung in my straps and let go of the stick while I took aim and clicked the shutter. It came out fine. Goodbye to school. During my last year at Repton, my mother said to me, "Would you like to go to Oxford or Cambridge when you leave school?" In those days, it was not difficult to get into either of those great universities, so long as you could pay. No, thank you, I said. I want to go straight from school to work for a company that will send me to wonderful faraway places like Africa or China. You must remember that there was virtually no air travel in the early 1930s. Africa was 2 weeks away from England by boat, and it took you about 5 weeks to get to China. These were distant and magical lands, and nobody went to them just for a holiday. You went there to work. Nowadays you can go anywhere in the world in a few hours, and nothing is fabulous anymore. But it was a very different matter in 1934. So during my last term, I applied for a job only to those companies that would be sure to send me abroad. They were the Shell Company, Eastern Staff, Imperial Chemicals, Eastern Staff, and a Finnish lumber company whose name I've forgotten. I was accepted by the Imperial Chemicals, and by the Finnish Lumber Company, but for some reason I wanted most of all to get it into the Shell Company. When the day came for me to go up to London for this interview, my housemaster told me it was ridiculous for me to even try. The Eastern staff of Shell are the creme de la creme, he said. There will be at least 100 applicants and about 5 vacancies. Nobody has a hope unless he's been head of school or head of the house, and you aren't even a house prefect. My housemaster was right about the applicants. There were 107 boys waiting to be interviewed when I arrived at the head office of the Shell Company in London, and there were 7 places to be filled. Please don't ask me how I got one of those places. I don't know myself, but get it, I did. And when I told my housemaster the good news on my return to the school, he didn't congratulate me or shake me warmly by the hand. He turned away, muttering, "All I can say is I'm damn glad I don't own any shares in Shell." I didn't care any longer what my housemaster thought. I was all set. I had a career. It was lovely. I had to leave school forever in July 1934 and join the Shell Company 2 months later in September, when I would be exactly 18. I was to be an Eastern Staff trainee at a salary of £5 a week. That summer, for the first time in my life, I did not accompany the family to Norway. I somehow felt the need for a special kind of last fling before I became a businessman. So, while still at school during my last term, I signed up to spend August with something called the Public Schools Exploring Society. The leader of this outfit was a man who had gone with Captain Scott on his last expedition to the South Pole, and he was taking a party of senior schoolboys to explore the interior of Newfoundland during the summer holidays. It sounded like fun. Without the slightest regret, I said goodbye to Repton forever and rode back to Kent on my motorbike. This splendid machine was a 500cc Ariel, which I had bought the year before for £18, and during my last term at Repton, I kept it secretly in a garage along the Willington Road about 2 miles away. On Sundays, I used to walk to the garage and disguise myself in helmet, goggles, old raincoat and rubber waders and ride all over Derbyshire. It was fun to go roaring through Repton itself, with nobody knowing who you were, swishing past the masters, walking in the street and circling around the dangerous and superstitious school bozers out for their Sunday strolls. I trembled to think what would have happened to me had I been caught, but I wasn't caught. So on the last day of the term, I zoomed joyfully away and left school behind me for ever and ever. I was not quite 18. I had only 2 days at home before I was off to Newfoundland with the public schools explorers. Our ship sailed from Liverpool at the beginning of August and took 6 days to reach St. John's. There was about 30 boys of my own age on the expedition, as well as 4 experienced adult leaders, but Newfoundland, as I found out, was not much of a country. For 3 weeks we trudged all over that desolate land with enormous loads on our backs. We carried tents and ground sheets and sleeping bags and saucepans and food and axes and everything else one needs in the interior of an unmapped, uninhabitable and inhospitable country. My own load, I know, weighed exactly 114 pounds, and someone else always had to help me hoist the rucksack on my back in the mornings. We lived on pemmican and lentils, and the 12 of us who had went separately on what was called the long march from the north to the south of the island and back again suffered a good deal from lack of food. I can remember very clearly how we experimented with eating boiled lichen and reindeer moss to supplement our diet, but it was a genuine adventure, and I returned home hard and fit and ready for anything. There followed 2 years of intensive training with the Shell Company in England. We were 7 trainees in that year's group, and each of us was being carefully prepared to uphold the majesty of the Shell Company in one or another remote tropical country. We spent weeks at the huge Shell Haven refinery with a special instructor who taught us all about fuel oil and diesel oil and gas oil and lubricating oil and kerosene and gasoline. After that, we spent months at the head office in London, learning how the great company functioned from the inside. I was still living in Bexley, Kent, with my mother and 3 sisters, and every morning, 6 days a week, Saturdays included, I would dress neatly in a sombre grey suit, have breakfast at 7:45, and then, with a brown trilby on my head and a furled umbrella in my hand, I would board the 8:15 train to London together with a swarm of other equally sombre-suited businessmen. I found it easy to fall into their pattern. We were all very serious and dignified gents taking the train to our offices in the city of London, where each of us, so we thought, was engaged in high finance and other enormously important matters. Most of my companions wore hard bowler hats, and a few like me wore soft triblies. But not one of us on that train in the year of 1934 went bareheaded. It wasn't done. And none of us, even on the sunniest days, went without his furled umbrella. The umbrella was our badge of office. We felt naked without it. Also, it was a sign of respectability. Road menders and plumbers never went to work with umbrellas. Businessmen did. I enjoyed it, I really did. I began to realise how simple life could be if one had a regular routine to follow with fixed hours and a fixed salary and very little original thinking to do. The life of a writer is absolute hell compared with the life of a businessman. The writer has to force himself to work. He has to make his own hours, and if he doesn't go to his desk at all, there is nobody to scold him. If he is a writer of fiction, he lives in a world of fear. Each new day demands new ideas, and he can never be sure whether he is going to come up with them or not. 2 hours of writing fiction leaves this particular writer absolutely drained. For those 2 hours, he's been miles away. He's been somewhere else, in a different place, with a totally different people. And the effort of swimming back into normal surroundings is very great. It's almost a shock. The writer walks out of his workroom in a daze. He wants a drink. He needs it. It happens to be a fact that nearly every writer of fiction in the world drinks more whiskey than is good for him. He does it to give himself faith, hope and courage. A person is a fool to become a writer. His only compensation is absolute freedom. He has no master except his own soul, and that, I am sure, is why he does it. The Shell Company did us proud. After 12 months at head office, we trainees were all sent away to various Shell branches in England to study salesmanship. I went to Somerset and spent several glorious weeks selling kerosene to old ladies in remote villages. My kerosene motor tanker had a tap at the back, and when I rolled into Shepton Mallet or Midsummer Norton or Pagedown St John's or Hinton Blewett or Temple Cloud or Chumanga or Huish Champflower, the old girls and the young maidens would hear the roar of my motor and would come out of their cottages with jugs and buckets to buy a gallon of kerosene for their lamps and their heaters. It is fun for a young man to do that sort of thing. Nobody gets a nervous breakdown or a heart attack from selling kerosene to gentle country folk from the back of a tanker in Somerset on a fine summer's day. Then suddenly in 1936 I was summoned back to head office in London. One of the directors wished to see me. "We're sending you to Egypt," he said. "It'll be a 3-year tour, then 6 months leave. Be ready to go in 1 week's time." "Oh, but sir," I cried out, "not Egypt. I really don't want to go to Egypt." The great man reeled back in his chair as though I had slapped him in the face with a plate of poached eggs. "Egypt," he said slowly, "is one of our finest and most important areas. We're doing you a favour in sending you there, instead of to some mosquito-ridden place in the swamps." I kept silent. "May I ask why you do not wish to go to Egypt?" he said. I knew perfectly well why, but I didn't know how to put it. What I wanted was jungles and lions and elephants and tall coconut palms swaying on silvery beaches. And Egypt had none of that. Egypt was desert country. It was bare and sandy and full of tombs and relics and Egyptians, and I didn't fancy it at all. "What is wrong with Egypt?" the director asked me again. I stammered, "It's too dusty, sir." The man stared at me. "Too what?" he cried. "Dusty," I said. "Dusty," he shouted. "Too dusty. I've never heard such rubbish." There was a long silence. I was expecting him to tell me to fetch my hat and coat and leave the building forever, but he didn't do that. He was an awfully nice man, and his name was Mr. Godber. He gave a deep sigh and rubbed a hand over his eyes and said, "Well, very well then, if that's the way you want it. Redfern will go to Egypt instead of you, and you'll have to take the next posting that comes up, dusty or not. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir, I realise that." "If the next vacancy happens to be in Siberia," he said, "you'll have to take it." "I quite understand, sir," I said, "and thank you very much." Within a week, Mr. Godber summoned me again to his office. "You're going to East Africa," he said. "Hooray," I shouted, jumping up and down. "That's marvellous, sir. That's wonderful. How terrific." The great man smiled. "It's quite dusty there too," he said. "Lions," I cried, "and elephants and giraffes and coconuts everywhere." "Your boat leaves from London docks in 6 days," he said. "You get off at Mombasa. Your salary will be £500 per annum, and your tour is for 3 years. I was 20 years old. I was off to East Africa, where I would walk about in khaki shorts every day and wear a toppy on my hat. I was ecstatic. I rushed home and told my mother. "And I'll be gone for 3 years," I said. I was her only son, and we were very close. Most mothers faced with a situation like this would have shown a certain amount of distress. 3 years is a long time, and Africa was very far away. There would be no visits in between, but my mother did not allow even the tiniest bit of what she must have felt to disturb my joy. "Oh, well done you," she cried. "It's a wonderful news. And it's just where you wanted to go, isn't it?" The whole family came down to London docks to see me off on the boat. It was a tremendous thing in those days for a young man to be going off to Africa to work. The journey alone would take 2 weeks, sailing through the Bay of Biscay, past Gibraltar, across the Mediterranean, through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea, calling in at Aden and arriving finally at Mombasa. What a prospect that was. I was off to the land of palm trees and coconuts and coral reefs and lions and elephants and deadly snakes, and a white hunter who'd lived 10 years in Mwanza had told me that if a black mamba bit you, you died within the hour, writhing in agony and foaming at the mouth. I couldn't wait. Although I didn't know it at the time, I was sailing away for a good deal longer than 3 years because the Second World War was to come along in the middle of it all. But before that happened, I got my African adventure all right. I got to the roasting heat and the crocodiles and the snakes and the long safaris up country, selling shell oil to the men who ran the diamond mines and the sisal plantations. I learned about an extraordinary machine called a decorticator. A name I always loved, which shredded the big leathery sisal leaves into fibre. I learned to speak Swahili and to shake the scorpions off my mosquito boots in the mornings. I learned what it was like to get malaria and to run a temperature of 105 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 days. And when the rainy seasons came and the water poured down into solid sheets and flooded the little dirt roads, I learned how to spend nights in the back of a stifling station wagon with all the windows closed against marauders from the jungle. Above all, I learned how to look after myself in a way that no young person can ever do by staying in civilization. When the big war broke out in 1939, I was in Dar es Salaam, and from there, I went up to Nairobi to join the RAF. 6 months later, I was a fighter pilot flying Hurricanes all around the Mediterranean. I flew in the western desert of Libya and Greece and Palestine and Syria and Iraq and in Egypt. I shot down some German planes and I got shot down myself, crashing in a burst of flames and crawling out and getting rescued by brave soldiers crawling on their bellies all over the sand. I spent 6 months in hospital in Alexandria, and when I came out, I flew again. But all that is another story. It has nothing to do with childhood or school or gobstoppers or dead mice or bozers or summer holidays among the islands of Norway. It is a different tale altogether, and if all goes well, I may give a shot at telling it one of these days.